Okay. Welcome again, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be presenting the Scaling Agile Showdown webinar. This webinar is being brought to you in partnership with Scrum Training Institute and Agile Thought. Your presenters today will be Christy Urbeck, Principal Transformation Consultant with Agile Thought, and Jens Ostergaard, owner and certified Scrum trainer with Scrum Training Institute. So what I'd like to first do is go over just a couple of brief housekeeping items as we are getting started today. If you all wouldn't mind just double checking your mute settings, we would ask that you please stay on mute for the duration of the presentation. We will be taking questions via chat. So if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat window, and we're going to allow time at the end of the presentation for questions. And just also to let you know, the presentation is being recorded, so we will be providing that as a link after the presentation as well, so that you'll have that as a reference point. And if we are all set, I believe, Christy, I'm going to be turning it over to you first. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be with you today and share Scaled Agile Frameworks. We're going to talk about SAFe, and then I'll turn it over to Jens, and he'll talk about LESS and Scrum at Scale, and then we'll come back to me, and I'll talk again about Nexus. So, when is the right time to use a Scaled Agile Framework for the enterprise, also known as SAFe? We believe it's the best time is when you're wanting to manage large-scale programs in a lean agile approach. And so we have a couple of things that you can look to assess and determine whether or not this is going to be a good fit. So if your teams need to align, coordinate, and deliver an integrated product, if there is a delivery of a product that requires both the business and technology teams, and that you have at least one agile release train with 50 to 125 people, and you want to even scale it further, you can have 5 to 12 agile teams with 5 to 11 team members, then you're in the right place, in the right arena for SAFe to make sense. SAFe is definitely for a larger program, and they have multiple configurations so that you can start small and grow even in your Scaled Agile Framework approach. So if these things are in play within your organization and within the teams that you're looking to scale, SAFe may be a really good fit for you. The other thing to keep in mind with SAFe is that it's based on Lean Agile principles. So very similar to how the Agile Manifesto is based on its 12 principles. SAFe has originally had 9 principles, and in SAFe 5.0, it released a 10th principle, which is to organize around value. But what you'll see, and as you review the SAFe Lean Agile principles and connect them with the Agile Manifesto, there's a lot of correlation. There is a lot of interest and connection points between the original Agile Manifesto and its 12 principles, and now SAFe's 10 principles. What is most interesting for me is that it is, if you look at and use and leverage SAFe from a principle standpoint, you're going to do really well. And some of the anti-patterns that we see or hear about in SAFe definitely fall away when we lean into the principles. So similar to how that happens within the Agile Manifesto, it's also important to really understand that the basis of SAFe as a framework are principles. So if we talk about the heart of SAFE, it really is what's called essential SAFE. This is the foundational framework that SAFE created, and it's the most basic configuration which provides minimal elements necessary to be successful within SAFE, some of which are here. And these are added in SAFE 5.0. So the Agile product delivery, the team and technical agility component, and the Lean Agile leadership all were added in 5.0. Everything else has been in place in some shape or fashion since its inception. And similar to how Scrum has evolved over time, SAFE absolutely also evolved over time to get to where it is today. Another component that got added is the customer centricity factor. So this is really important that SAFE 5.0 talks a lot about the business agility component and allows us to expand SAFE far beyond the realm of IT and create the conversation around the business agility aspects that are so important to us, a very successful implementation of any scaled agile framework. The other thing that's important is that the whole inspect and adapt component has not gone away, and it remains in place. So the PDCA aspects of plan, do, check, adjust are still an important component and must be in place in order for SAFE to be as effective as it can be. One of the most important events that happens in SAFE at every configuration, whether you're talking about essential or full, is the program increment. This is where we come together as a group and we reflect and build out what's going to happen for our next series of sprints. PIs or program increments last typically 8 to 12 weeks. And this is a set of key events that aid in the team alignment, visibility, and adapting to new information. So you have everything from preparing for your PI planning to the actual PI planning event, your Scrum and Art syncs, your system demos, the inspect and adapt. All of this goes hand in hand and connects the teams together beyond what's happening day to day. The other really interesting aspect and helpful aspect in a large-scaled framework environment is a program board. And this is important because it provides visibility to aspects that will cross multiple teams or have dependencies or are features or milestones that everyone within the Agile release train, or if you're beyond one multiple art trains need to be aware of, so that they can see what are the milestones, what are the dependencies that we have team to team, and how do we make sure that we're mitigating any risks that are identified in that program board so that we can continue to deliver a working increment at the end of our PI. In large solution SAFE, we bring together a group of people and a set of events and systems that help us coordinate when we have more than one art. So if we have multiple value streams, multiple Agile release trains that need to coordinate, there's additional roles, artifacts, events, and coordination that's required, and the large solution allows us to do that in a very predictable and coordinated way. So it's not designed to create more hierarchy. It's designed to create more opportunities for coordination, understanding, and events that help us keep moving forward as we have multiple teams coming together. At the portfolio level, again, this is for an even larger organization or larger product or program delivery, where you're needing to deliver and align at the portfolio level. And this really is aligned to your enterprise strategy organizing the development around the flow of value through one or more value streams. And this is something that's typically used at a much larger scale, much larger organization. And we need to ensure that we have the right systems in place and the governance in place to coordinate all of our activities, reduce or mitigate our risks, and make sure that we're bringing value to the organization and ultimately to our clients in a meaningful and structured way. And then full safe is the most comprehensive configuration, and it supports enterprises that build and maintain a portfolio of large integrated solutions and includes all of the 7 core competencies that are identified in SAFE 5.0. So you'll see these on the far left-hand side with everything from organizational agility to lean portfolio management, business solutions or enterprise solution delivery, agile product delivery, team and technical agility, the continuous learning culture, and then of course at the foundation is the Lean Agile leadership component, which is absolutely critical in ensuring that behaviors, mindset, actions, and activities are fully aligned to delivering this full scope of value. So I'm going to pause there, and I believe we'll turn it over to Jens, and I'm going to stop sharing and let him begin sharing his presentation.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Christy. So I will move on now with Scrum at Scale. And we choose this order here because SAFE and Scrum at Scale are probably the most, what should we say, different from each other. So I will share my screen here now and and start sharing there. So you should see it now. Okay. So Scrum the next 3 we're going to present, I should say that also Scrum at Scale and Less and Nexus. They are all based on the Scrum Guide. But what you have to be aware of when it comes to the Scrum Guide is the Scrum Guide only talks about one team. It doesn't talk about how to scale. So the Scrum Guide is one team, and so it's a little bit different how they interpret it, the Scrum at Scale, Less, and Nexus. Anyway, I asked about Jeff and Ken, who have written the Scrum Guide, what do you think is the heart of the whole thing, since we are dealing with Scrum here? Well, and Jeff, he wrote back, well, the heart of Scrum is the team has a potential shippable increment of product at the end of a sprint. Ken wrote back, you know you're doing the heart of Scrum if nobody allocates assignments and ensures they are done in time. So that's what the creators of Scrum feel, that's the core of the whole thing. Okay, moving on. So why are organizations struggling to be agile? Well, if you can't prioritize, cool agile tools will only make you feel better as you fail. If you can't deliver, cool technical tools will just keep you busy as you fail. If you can't regularly refactor the organization to focus on priorities, no scaling framework prevents you from failing. And I think probably the last one is the most important one. If you can't refactor the organization to fit your products and how they're moving, then it becomes difficult. Chaos resolution, they did this, I think it's 10,000 projects, that's what it said in the bottom, yeah. So what can you learn from these things here? Well, if you look at this, the size of the projects, Agile, Waterfall, and so forth down the line, well, obviously Agile is better than Waterfall. But an even more important thing we can learn from this one is that small size projects are more successful than medium or large size projects. So if we were going to follow this table, what would that mean? Well, that would mean we should try to break products into smaller products. For instance, let's say we have a car. A car is a product. We have an engine. Engine is a product. We have a spark plug. A spark plug is a product. So if we break it down into smaller pieces and then make sure that we that we keep them integrated with, we will have a bit better success of implementing it. So that's the Scrum at Scale philosophy of doing it that way. As you see here, you see something here in the middle at the bottom of the slide. And for you, the younger, you might not know what it is. Usually when I ask in classes and so on, what is this? And the younger people think, well, is it some kind of server? But if you've been around some time, like me, you might recognize it's a stereo rack. And why do we have a stereo rack there? Well, if you remember, you had a stereo rack, you had a tape deck, you had a record player, you had the booster, you had a receiver, you have well, you had all kinds of things. Now, you would always have a weak link then. So let's say your receiver you didn't have enough watts to really get the full benefit of your speakers. So what would you do? Well, you took your receiver, you went down to the radio store, Radio Shack or Best Buy or something, and you bought a better receiver with more watts so you can get a better sound. But what is key for this is that there were stable interfaces. You could plug it in and it would work immediately because there was stable interface. So if you're going to break down a product in several products, key thing is to have stable interfaces. So you can work on the smaller product and still integrate to a larger product. So the Scrum Scale Framework, it has 2 loops. I'm just going to quickly go get them on here. So it has the Scrum Master cycle you see on the left side. So the Scrum Master cycle is continuous improvement, cross-team coordination, deployment, release feedback, and product increment delivered, which also belongs to the product owner cycle. And on the product owner cycle, you have the vision, you have the prioritization of the product backlog, you have product refinement, breaking down product backlog items into smaller items. And you have release planning and so forth also. So those are the 2 cycles. And then you kind of scale with these cycles. Oh, metrics and transparency came on there also. One Scrum team is this one. So Scrum at Scale is based on you just take one Scrum team and then you add Scrum teams to them. So it could look like this, for instance. We have the Scrum's perspective here. So here we have 5 teams. We have 5 Scrum Masters and 5 product owners. So this is Scrum of Scrums is not an event. It's it's something they have to coordinate between the teams. And the Scrum of Scrum here is a little bit different in the definition compared to the other scaling frameworks we talk about today, because the Scrum of Scrums here, their job is to make sure we can integrate everything, that all the teams can integrate their stuff and that there's no problem. If there's a problem, the Scrum of Scrum is responsible for getting it solved. Now, that doesn't mean that the Scrum Master does it, for instance, or the person going to the Scrum of Scrums. They can defer to anybody to solve this, but it's still a Scrum Master's job to make sure that we can integrate. Because if you're going to have a potential shippable increment by the end of the sprint, which Jeff Sutherland says is the heart of Scrum, you have to be able to integrate. So somebody has to be responsible for that. So that's the Scrum of Scrums. Then we have the Scaled Daily Scrum. So this is where the Scrum Masters get together. Do we need to change anything? Do we have any dependencies that we need to? Have we learned of new dependencies? Or are we doing something that could possibly disturb any other teams? So that's the Scaled Daily Scrum. I should also say here, you see I have 5 teams. And that's because if you grow to more than 5 teams, you have 2 separate Scaled Daily Scrum, and then you will have you add a layer as soon as you get more than 5. Yeah, I will come back to that later. Yes, this is some of the examples of Daily Scrum questions that I talked about. So if you have 10 teams, you will have 2 times 5 teams. And the reason for that is a Harvard Business Study that shows that the ideal team size is 4.6. So with here, the Scrum Scale want to try to keep it at 4.6, even when it gets to teams. So when you need to integrate between each other, try not to have more than 5 teams. So if you have more than 5 teams, as you have 10 teams here, so you have a Scrum of Scrum within each 5 teams, and then you have a Scrum of Scrum of Scrums on the higher level. So you integrate, so you always add, and if you then had 5 times 5 teams, so you had 25 teams, well, that would mean the Scrum of Scrums would have 5 teams. So you would add another layer if you get more teams then. So what should I say? It expands liner. You can just add teams onto as you move on. And if you have a lot of teams here, so you have an example of it here. So you have the Scrum of Scrums, Scrum of Scrum of Scrums, Scrum of Scrum of Scrums. And after the last one, it goes up to the EAT. That's the Executive Action Team. Now, they are responsible to solve the hardest problems. The hardest problems we have to integrate, they have to solve it. So including in the Executive Action Team should be C-level people. C-level people who can, as I said, solve the hardest problems. Now, the Executive Action Team is also responsible for transforming the organization into an agile organization. So they have the transformation backlog, the organizational transformation backlog. So they own that. They don't execute it, but they own it. And then we have something called Agile Principal who actually execute it, which is basically a Scrum Center or an Agile Center, where you have people who can go out and help teams do sprint planning, or if there are any other problems in their Scrum implementation, they can help with that. So who should be on the executive? Well, C-level people, as I said, somebody who can change company policy, who can refactor the organization, somebody who can pay for something. And as I said, you may be somebody from Agile practice, a Scrum Star, an Agile champion or something, whatever you call them. And leaders who can motivate change, maybe somebody from HR, it could be somebody from legal department also. But you need somebody who can do these things, who can take responsibility for the Agile transformation, and also for that we can integrate the whole thing. So that's on the Scrum Master cycle. If we go on the Product Owner cycle, it's basically scales the same way. So when in the middle here, you see we have 5 teams, 5 product owners. The 5 product owners gets together in what we call a meta Scrum. When you have 5 product owners, one of them has to be the chief product owner, because as we say in Scrum, we have to have the single ringable neck. If we cannot agree on something, somebody has to make the decision. So we'll get to that later, but so the chief product owner, the meta Scrum, they have their product backlog, but then the 5 product owners here, they pull product backlog items down to the team product backlog. And then again, if you look at the one to the right, then you have the executive meta Scrum also there. So they're working on value streams or portfolio management. They have the vision for the organization and what's the highest priority for the organization. So that's a little bit different of who will be in that. It's still C-level people, but they be more from the business side, because they will have the top product backlog. So if we're looking at it, the hierarchy of the product, we could take this as an example. So let's say we have a vision. The vision could be the banking provider of choice for small business. So on the next level, the component level, we will have some component goal. In this case, we will increase small business usage of e-banking website and the retail bank center rated excellent by small business. We break that down into features. So if we take the increased small business use of e-banking website, we break it down into two, very hard to see, two features: add online customer center for self-service of common needs, and add monthly financial reporting summary to track company profits. That will break down then into epics. And again, if we take the first one, it would break down into find the branch location. I'm just having to keep track of my time here. Stop payments, access historical statements. And then if we take find branch location, we can break that down into able to search for language skills, specified address, hours of operation, and so forth. So you see how each level has its backlog, and it's then broken down into smaller pieces. Basically, as you think of a one team product backlog, we break it down into smaller pieces. But here it kind of spreads out to teams instead. Okay, so that's what Scrum at Scale. I went a little bit over time, and I'm sorry for that. I'm just going to start the clock here again so I can reset start, try to keep track. So less is a little bit different. Less is built on that you have one product owner, no matter how big the organization is. Again, it's built on the Scrum Guide. So there's two less, there's less small and less huge. And less small is an escalating of less huge. So in less small, which I will talk about first, you have 2 to 8 teams. And really, if you had 2 teams, as I think Christy said before also, if you have 2 teams, you just figured out you're the 2 teams, what to do. So all teams participate in sprint planning, sprint review, and product backlog refinement. Now, for these teams, up to 8 teams, they have one product owner and they have one product backlog. So that's more similar to SAFE with the one product backlog. They have full-time Scrum Masters. So the full-time Scrum Masters, they have 1 to 3 teams that they are facilitating. They are prescriptive on Scrum events. Now, when it comes to coordination, for instance, integration, how do we integrate this? Well, unless we leave it to the teams. We leave it to the teams to figure out how you're going to integrate. So you could say in that sense, less is more decentralizing the whole thing into letting the teams decide how we're going to figure out about standards, how are we going to figure out about coding standards and integration, definition of done, and different things. So in that sense, they're more decentralized than the others. On the other hand, they're more centralized when it comes to a product owner. So it has the same thing as in Scrum. It has sprint planning part 1, sprint planning part 2. And you have the different teams and their product backlog refinement in the middle of the sprint. And then sprint review, retrospective, and overall retrospective. And then you go on with the next sprint. Sprint planning part 1. This is where the sprint goal is set for each team. For all the teams. Clarifying, are there any last questions, any loose ends that we need to clarify before we take some requirements into the sprints? The team collectively decides which PBIs each team will work on. So think about it like all the teams are there. They have different parts of the room, each team, and they figure out who's best on doing best. Yeah, and if there are more than 2 teams, send representatives of teams, not the Scrum Master. But in part 2, that's where all the teams are there. Part 1 could be a little bit different. I'm sorry, by mistake. Yeah, each team build their own sprint backlog. So it's in part 1, we take in which product backlog items goes to which team. Now in part 2, we build the sprint backlog and we coordinate whatever shared work there might be that we know of today. Sprint review, how do you do that? Well, you have large team rooms, large rooms with all the teams. So they call it bazaar style. So a team has an area where they go, and then the stakeholders and product owners, they go to their area of interest to do the the review of how are the new product increment working in the product. Product backlog refinement. So this can be you're working on the product backlog. So for some teams, it's kind of obvious that they're going to have these product backlog items. So they refine themselves. And that's what's the blue square represents there. We have one team and it's pretty clear what they are going to do. And then we have the yellow rectangle there, which represents there are more than one team who has some PBIs they have to refine. And that's fine also. So already earlier, there could be decided some product backlog items and who's going to do them. So this is for splitting larger product backlogs into smaller, just like you do regular product backlog refinement. Getting new estimates after we split them and identify dependencies that we have. Product backlog refinement, when you do that, well, first of all, you do the initial product backlog refinement, which is the column to the right. Who should be there? Members from all teams. Should the product owner be there? Absolutely. Customers, user? Absolutely. Select which team work on which items? No, not yet. It's a little bit too early. Level of clarification? Well, in depth, you have to answer all the questions and it should take at least 2 days. Typical frequency? Well, that will be once, obviously, because it's the initial product backlog you're building. Then if you go one step to the left, we have the single team product backlog refinements, one team. Should the product owner be? Rarely. Customers, users? Probably. So probably in this case, the product owner has deferred to the stakeholders to clarify things. So they already know what they're working on. And again, clarification in depth, 1/2 to 1 day. Typical frequency, almost every sprint. And then you have the multi-team product backlog refinement. Should the product owner be? Depends, sometimes, sometimes not. Customers, users, probably again. Depends on the knowledge, who has the domain knowledge that the team needs to know. And we're still not selecting who will do what as we wait with that until we get to sprint planning. Again, in-depth clarification. Again, 1/2 to 1 day. And we do it almost every sprint. And then we have the overall product backlog refinement. All teams, includes the product owner, includes customers, users, not so much. And here, with the product owner, which group of things should go to which team? And then a level of clarification, lightweight, and should be a short meeting. And you do it every sprint. How do you coordinate and integrate? Well, some ways of doing it. It's still up to the teams, as I said before. They could talk to each other, just talk to each other. Another way is that each team sends representatives to the daily scrum in the other teams and to listen if they have any problems, and they probably have agreed that they can contact each other also. You could do the scrum of scrums. What did my team do that is relevant to other teams? What will my team do that is relevant? What are my team's obstacles so we can reach the sprint goal? So it's similar to the daily scaled daily scrum in Scrum at Scale. You can also have what we call travelers. So if you're going to work a long time for it, you could have travelers. They kind of travel and they sit with another team for one sprint. So they travel around sitting with all the teams. So all the teams could have a traveler and they will kind of circulate to teams until they come back to their own team, having been visiting all the other teams. If we then go into less huge, meaning we have more than 8 teams, well, what we do then is that we basically split it up into making multiple small, less small. So in this case, you see here, we have up to 24 teams. So we have 3 sections who has their own product backlog. And each product backlog here has what we call an area product owner. And then you have the product owner who oversees everything. So basically think of it as adding a layer on top of what we had before. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand back to Christy.
Awesome. Thank you, Jens. And I will share again. And let's see, before we go into Nexus, quick little quiz for you as far as the key takeaways for SAFE. The number one is that it's a framework. So while some people, and I know I held this myth as well before I really dug into it, got trained, and then started working with it, is I thought it was a prescription and you had to do it exactly just so. But in reality, it's a framework similar to Scrum. And so it is designed, though, at scale for the entire enterprise, and it's supporting both the business and technology. So it's a way to bring IT and business folks together in a shared framework that everyone can leverage. Secondly, the PI planning event is SAFE's secret sauce. And the reason we call that the secret sauce is because it aligns teams around a shared vision and objectives, and it identifies and coordinates the dependencies across the teams. It is definitely build on a cadence and release on demand so that you are able to release to your customers in a safe manner into production, but each iteration of the system demo demonstrates the fully integrated product increment. We definitely want to focus on our customers and make sure that the customer is at the center of every decision. And absolutely, you can adapt the framework if they honor the intention of the SAFE Lean Agile principles. So similar again to Scrum and to the Agile Manifesto, always looking back to the principles as we make our decisions is critically important. And we'll see that also in Nexus as we move into Nexus. Nexus is Scrum.org's scaled professional Scrum framework, and Nexus leverages Scrum as its building block. So while you have the Scrum guide that Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber wrote together, Ken went ahead and built out Nexus as his intent for how Scrum specifically should be scaled. And if we look at evaluate when should we scale Scrum, Ken is very, very intentional, and the Nexus guide is very intentional around how to scale Scrum and when Nexus is appropriate and when another framework might be appropriate. So if we look at this matrix, if you have one product and 1 to 2 Scrum teams, the best solution is Scrum itself. If we have more than one product and still 1 to 2 teams, Waterfall or a project management office might be an option. Doesn't mean that we have to do that, but it certainly can be an option in how we leverage scaling. If we get into more than one product and more than 2 teams, we want to look at portfolio management, because now we are beyond what Scrum intended, because we're managing multiple products and we have multiple teams. And then finally, if we have one product and more than 2 teams, Nexus is where we want to look at as a guide for how to scale teams within a single product. And they call this Scaled Professional Scrum. It's also known as Nexus. If we look at the Scrum framework itself, Scrum.org took the framework and then built upon it to build out the Nexus. So in Scrum, we have 3 roles, 3 artifacts, and 5 events. And the 3 roles, as you know, are the product owner, the development team, and the Scrum Master. That equates to a single Scrum team. And within that Scrum team, they are delivering on 3 artifacts: the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and then the product increment. And this is what they're doing in a cadence of 1 to 30 days, depending what their cadence is. And within that cadence, there's going to be 5 events: the sprint itself, which is up to 1 month; And that's the container of risk that the business and the IT organization is willing to own. And so in this, we have also sprint planning, we have our daily scrum, we have our sprint review, and we have our sprint retrospective. And each of these events plays a role in Scrum and in bringing that product increment to life. And we want to honor that within Nexus, and we add on to that. So as you can see here in this diagram, the Nexus framework adds in a couple of things. It adds 2 roles, 3 artifacts, and has 5 events. So the first 2 roles are, one is there's 1 product owner for all teams. So if you have 3 teams or if you have 9 teams, and that's the prescription from Nexus, or the recommendation is Nexus equates to 1 product owner for up to 9 Scrum teams. Those are the 2 roles. So you've got the Nexus integration team with those 3 to 9 Scrum teams. 3 artifacts are, there's 1 product backlog. Again, for all of those 3 to 9 teams, we're working from 1 product backlog. We've added in a Nexus sprint backlog, which helps us understand those dependencies and interrelationships between the 3 to 9 Scrum teams. And then we have an integrated increment at the end. And that integrated increment is the integration of all of those 3 to 9 teams product. So that at the end of that sprint cadence, nothing is undone. We are delivering on that integrated increment. And then the 5 events, refinement changes. So in Scrum, refinement is a GASP, a generally accepted Scrum practice. It does not have to be done. But in Nexus, it is a formal event that we use to better understand our product backlog and ensure that we're prepared for our Nexus sprint planning. And the Nexus sprint planning is the Nexus plus the Scrum teams in order to plan out our work. The other items are, or events, are this Nexus sprint review, the Nexus daily scrum in conjunction or in addition to the daily scrums, and then the Nexus sprint retrospective. So in Nexus, the sprint retrospective has, we start with the Nexus group coming together, then we do the individual Scrum teams, and then we come back together again. And the Nexus integration team is a group of people that is pulled together from the Scrum teams to ensure the right body of work is being brought forward for that particular sprint. Oops, pardon me. One of the biggest points within Nexus is that a lot of what has to happen at this level is dependency management. So within refinement, we're going to identify our dependencies. Within our planning, we're going to visualize them. The Nexus integration team, they're not there while you might think they are there to actually do the integration work. That's not true. They're there to identify and reduce the dependencies that are occurring in those 3 to 9 teams and ensure that the integration work gets done at the team level so that, again, we're delivering an integrated increment at the end of our sprint. And then during the retrospective and the daily scrums, we're going to discuss those dependencies. We want to make sure that they've been mitigated or they've been accounted for, and we have a plan for addressing them in that 24-hour daily scrum. The Nexus integration team, as I said, is made up of folks already on the team, and there's no dedicated Scrum team, and they're not responsible for integrating code, but there is 1 Nexus product owner and 1 Scrum Master. So then they pull in the appropriate development team members, again, based on what is coming on, what is happening and has been brought forward for that particular Nexus sprint. So it's not necessarily a static group of people. And in fact, the healthier your Nexus integration team is, means the more that there is some movement so that you're bringing different voices and different skill sets forward to help reduce and mitigate those integration points. The Scrum coaches, the Nexus integration team coaches the Scrum team on development infrastructure and architectural standards. So they're also the body that makes sure that enterprise applications or integrations or governance is being managed and accounted for in the work at the Scrum team level. That is what I have for the Nexus point.
Okay, thank you, Christy and Jens. Okay, we've got some time left here, so we've got a couple questions. If you guys have a minute. One question came in. Do you guys have a chart with the differences between them with regards to principles, practices, or artifacts?
Well, the short answer is no. But that's, you know, we're aiming at setting up a two-day class to talk more about this. And that's where we would like to go into the differences. What are the differences in the different frameworks here, and how do they differ? And what could be some pros and cons, something to discuss in a class like that. So basically, what we're aiming at is a two-day class where the first day is to spend 2 hours on each framework, and then day two, working on the differences. So short answer is no, but it will likely be coming. Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Christy?
No, I wish it would be nice if there were a chart, a cheat sheet, so to speak. We have not found one, so it is something that we would have to create, Jens.
And it is very hard to do also because they are frameworks. And as Christy said in the presentation, you don't need to use. There are things you don't need to use.
Right.
So, and maybe you saw on the last slide also where it says it depends.
Right.
So it's hard to do.
Yeah, and I think the important concept here is that there's no right or wrong from a framework perspective. It is all about understanding the environment in which you're in. And some environments will not tolerate or it will not make sense to do something as comprehensive, perhaps, as SAFe. The overhead, the getting set up, the reorganization that's required to implement SAFe well, not all organizations can tolerate that. And in other ways, you might only have one product. And so if you tried to apply less or Scrum of Scrums or SAFe, you probably overkill for one particular product. So it's a matter of choosing the right framework and understanding a variety of dynamics that are going on that would make that scaled framework successful in your organization.
And if you are in really big organizations like Disney or something like that, you know, I know they're using at least 3 of the frameworks here that we mentioned today.
Sure.
Good. One other question we have out here is, will they have a common product backlog in less?
Well, up to 8 teams have a common product backlog. And then you add, so if you have 16 teams, you have 2 product backlogs. But on top of that, you would have the chief product owner with the main product backlog, so to speak. But it would only be 8 maximum 8 teams working on the same product backlog.
Good question. Okay. That's all the questions we have out in chat. If anyone has any additional questions, definitely feel free to ask them. What I will do in the meantime is we have a very brief retrospective poll that just has 2 questions that we would love to have you guys fill out for us. Before I launch that poll, Christy and Jens, did you have anything else that you wanted to add before I launch the poll?
Well, I would like to say this. I think this is a really hot topic in many, many places. And I don't think it's going to be smaller the next few years. Because this is about transforming the organization. And, we're getting better and better at being agile and Scrum on the team level. But when it comes to organization, it demands so much. It demands so much. You just imagine getting the whole agile mindset into an organization who is used to command and control and hierarchy and so on. So, it's going to be even more challenging the next couple of years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Actually, another couple questions got added here that are related and I think are good questions. If I want to become certified in one, what would be the choice? I've been a Scrum Master for about 7 years for a small company. I'd like to become certified in one to expand my understanding. Is there a recommendation for one over any of the others?
I would ask what frameworks are in place today and well, let's just start there. What frameworks are they using today? Can we have a conversation about that? Like if he or she is a Scrum Master, does that mean Scrum is the only framework in place, or are they doing other things?
For the person that did ask that question, would you be willing to go off mute and maybe talk about it a little bit more?
Yes. Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and I've been a Scrum Master for about 7 years for a small company. I implemented the Scrum there, and we use Kanban too, and we follow XP principles for programming. And but I'm actually, we sold the company, and now I'm looking for a job in big companies, going back to big companies. So one of the limitations I have is obviously I done Scrum, but for small teams, and I see the lack or my limitations on integration. So I decide I want to study a little further, because I don't have the experience, but I can study about, in Scale Agile. So what would you recommend?
Well, if you're looking at the job market, you probably should look at SAFe. But also be aware that SAFe has its own definition of Scrum and Agile. So there might be a different Scrum than you're used to. But it's by far the most popular scaling framework and the easiest way to get a job. Then I would recommend SAFe for that, if that's the purpose.
Yeah, and I would say, Elizabeth, if you've been using Scrum and you enjoyed Scrum, I would look into the Scaled Professional Scrum or the Nexus certification, the SPS certification from scrum.org, because it really helps solidify your knowledge and understanding of Scrum at a singular team level. So that would be another great place to start. I think the challenge with any scaled framework in the job market is they really want the actual application or experience. So while getting any certification, whether it's your SPC or a Safe Agilist or your SPS or any of the certifications in Less or Scrum at Scale, can help, finding a way to get the experience to augment the certification is really what's going to propel you in the job market. So so I don't know if there's opportunities from an internship or from, finding a way to get in and start as a singular Scrum Master with the intent to grow into a more scaled Agile coach or scaled framework may also be a way to get your foot in the door.
And it could also, just by attending a webinar like that, now you have a better understanding of the different scaling frameworks. So even having that knowledge, I would assume it'd be good if you come to a talk and you can actually talk about the differences between Safe Scrum at Scale and Nexus and Less. Even though it's a tough overview, and if you have great understanding of all four of them, you can go out and study and look at YouTube and so on, and reflect on what we've said here today. And I'm sure then you will be in a very good position, even in a large company, where you can do like this, but you can also do like that, and so on. Then you can argue for the case. But you need to study more or take certifications in all four of them, which obviously will be very expensive. But
well, I am PMP and ACP certified, and I have multiple other certifications and different technical skills. But moving from the small arena into looking for a job into a big financial company, that's where I think that integration part is definitely a limitation. And that's what I'm searching to, okay, I don't have that experience, but I mean, unless you do it, you can't have the experience. So, and I don't think it's an issue. I just think I need to be placed in the position to be able to use it.
Right. It's a catch-22. And like, if you can get your foot in the door, and you show that you know the differences and that you know how to evaluate the right scaled approach, that also, to Jens's point, could help. If you're in an area that has a strong Agile meetup community with networking, even if it's virtual community networking, that also can help just by making connections in the Agile community to bring you in or walk you in or make a recommendation based on the connections and the relationships you build in that community.
Thank you. Great ideas.
Where are you? Where are you from, Elizabeth? Where do you live?
Tampa, Florida.
Well, Tampa has an excellent, Tampa Bay Agile has an excellent Agile group.
Yes, I'm part of it and I'm active with them. Yeah, I love them, actually. It's a great resource. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth, for sharing. I think that brings us pretty much to the end of our time. I want to give you guys a minute or so to fill out our poll. So if there's no last questions, I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Jens, can you see if you can launch it on your side? It's telling me I don't have access to it.
Polling, launch poll. I'm launching it now.
Cool, thank you.
Can you see it? Can you see it, Natalie?
No, I cannot, but that's probably because I'm in as a host.
Yeah, I can actually. So yeah.
Okay, Christy, can you take a screenshot of it then as it's filled out, because it's not saved anywhere.
Okay.
Okay, now I can. As I unmute I went to unmute myself. Now it disappeared from me. Oh, maybe here. Never mind. No, I found it. Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
Maybe just a few more moments and then we'll end the polling. Okay, I think we're done. So let me just take a quick picture.
Okay, I will end the poll then.
Okay.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, I think that that pretty much brings us right up to the end of our hour, and definitely would love to thank everyone again for attending. And thank you, Christy and Jens, for providing again some awesome information about the different scaling frameworks. And just to maybe throw a little reminder out there, Jens, you mentioned the class. Do you recall the dates on that class?
No, me and Christy is going to talk about it next week. So we will see how to move on from here, because we
Okay.
had a couple of meetups now physically, and